All eyes are on Japan, where world leaders are touching down ahead of tomorrow's G7 summit. The meetings are taking place in the city of Hiroshima, where the U.S. dropped the first nuclear bomb in 1945 during World War II. A setting with significance, especially in today's tense climate around nuclear weapons and Russia's war in Ukraine. But experts are keeping watch on how the world leaders address the threat of China and cooperation with Beijing moving forward. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has landed in Hiroshima, Japan for the G7 Leaders Summit, where he's expected to push for increased cooperation on global and economic security to guard against geopolitical instability and the threat of climate change. The city of Hiroshima, profoundly significant to the summit. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped the first ever deployed atomic bomb over the city. The explosion instantly killing approximately 80,000 people in the blink of an eye. Tens of thousands more would later die from the aftermath of the attack, radiation exposure. The haunting images and the devastation still very much remembered by Japanese people to this day. But the city and its people have rebuilt. Experts say it's a strong message to Vladimir Putin, who has been not so subtle about his willingness to use his arsenal of nuclear weapons. United States President Joe Biden met with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida today.
As you said back in January when you were at the White House, I think the quote is, we face one of the most complex environments in recent history, security environments. And I couldn't agree with you more. But I'm proud that the United States and Japan are facing it together. And, we stand up for the shared values, including supporting the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereign territory and holding Russia accountable for its brutal aggression.
Biden telling Kishida that the U.S. and Japan will stand up to Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. The G7 summit runs from Friday to Sunday, in which member country leaders are expected to discuss a possible tightening of sanctions on Russia and security concerns about China, among other issues. Russia invaded Ukraine in February last year, but the war has largely stalemated, although Ukraine is expected to start a counteroffensive soon. The leaders will need to overcome some differences of their own, officials say, as they aim to protect unity against challenges from Beijing and Moscow. Divisions within the G7 appear to be the most notable over China, with countries grappling on how to warn against what they see as China's threat to global supply chains and economic security without completely alienating a powerful and important trade partner. The G7 countries, the United States, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Italy, are all closely tied economically to China, the world's second largest economy and a key global manufacturing base and market. Meanwhile, in China, President Xi Jinping is hosting his own meetings as the leaders of some Asian countries arrived for a banquet in Xi'an. The two-day Central Asian Summit will noticeably overlap with the meeting of the Group of Seven leaders, where Beijing's use of economic coercion in its dealings abroad is expected to be on the agenda. Joining us now is political science professor Aurel Braun from the University of Toronto. Professor, how significant is it that this meeting is being held in Hiroshima, seeing that a big topic among the leaders this weekend will likely be nuclear weapons and Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
The symbolism is powerful, but it is also the case that the G7 countries want to send a very unequivocal message to the world that nuclear wars cannot be fought, should not be even considered as an option, and that nuclear blackmail is not going to work. And that message is especially essential when it is sent to Russia, because Vladimir Putin has used nuclear weapons in a political fashion. That is, he has made threats, sometimes not too subtle, that were meant to intimidate Ukraine and to deter the West from helping Ukraine. And so the G7 have to be united in sending that message, standing in Hiroshima which, as we know, was one of the two cities where nuclear weapons had actually been used, where the devastation was so horrific. And so there is this need to disabuse Vladimir Putin of the notion that he has any nuclear options.
When it comes to China, we know the G7 nations are very much tied to that country. How do you see talks about cooperating with Beijing playing out?
The Western states have developed a very large degree of dependence on Chinese goods. This has happened over a number of years because we found that we could get these goods less expensively manufactured in China, or they could be manufactured in the case of what are called dirty industry, steel making, and so on, and we could save our own environment, and China becomes the world's largest producer of steel because the Chinese government may pay lip service to climate change, but in fact, they don't really care about it. Now we are realizing that this is not only an environmental issue, but it is also very much a political and economic issue, that China has not hesitated to use economic coercion. And it has used it far more frequently in the past 3 years than in the previous 3 years. And there have been studies that show that. So we need to diminish that dependence. We are dependent on batteries for electrical cars on China. They produce something like 70% of the world's electrical batteries, solar cells. But that dependence cannot be ended overnight.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has landed in Japan. What do you think is on his agenda for this weekend?
He will undoubtedly talk about the environment as a primary element, but environment has to be tied together with political reality. It has to be cognizant of economic factors as well. And it has to take into account the geopolitical situation. So undoubtedly, even though the environment will be a large topic of conversation, economic change, diminishing dependence on China for crucial goods, the support that the West needs to show over the long term for Ukraine to end Russian aggression and then to deter future aggression, all this will be part, I'm sure, of the agenda of our Prime Minister, but also all of the other 7 countries.
Thanks so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for having me on.